Welcome to another edition of Cognitive Dissidence. So we do a monthly roundtable. So if you're a Geopolitics and Empire listener, this is Hrvoje from Geopolitics and Empire.
I'm Monica Perez from the Monica Perez Show.
And I'm Parallel Mike of the Parallel Systems Broadcast and the Parallel Mike Podcast.
All right, so a lot is going on. And I thought maybe one thing we could start with is JFK stuff. And I wanted to share my screen real quick and play a few clips before throwing it off to the rest of my colleagues here. So I just had two clips. I think my general view is with the JFK declassifications. You know, here's Jefferson Morley. I've interviewed him, I think, at least 4 times. He's an old school leftist. He does some good work. He doesn't go far enough, I think, on other stuff. But he's excellent, and he just testified. And let me just play the clip. He basically says it was the CIA and Pentagon, which I do not doubt that was the case. At least, of course, people can add also Israeli intelligence, which was recently unredacted. The document with Angleton. Morley wrote a book on Angleton, which was actually good, and I interviewed him on it, where Angleton worked with Israeli intelligence service. But here's the clip from Jefferson Morley.
What happened?
So who do you think fired the shot?
I don't know.
You don't know, but you don't believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oswald was not the intellectual author of Kennedy's death, even if he fired a gun that day.
Who do you think was the intellectual author of Kennedy's death?
Kennedy's enemies high in his own government is as specific as I can be based on the available evidence. Mm-hmm. Probably CIA and Pentagon. Then what happened?
So who do you...
And I wanted to just play this clip, just the last 2 minutes of Oliver Stone's testimony. And I think he makes some good points here.
Can we return to a world where we can trust our government to level with us, the people for which this government exists? And if some people in power betrayed our Constitution and chose the path of war over peace, let the rest of us see past the lies and let us hear what we think happened. And with that knowledge, let us forgive, but not forget the transgressions, and let us praise the representatives, Democrat and Republican, who believe with the vast majority of the American people that the truth is the greatest treasure a Socratic soul can attain in this lifetime. I ask the committee to reopen what the Warren Commission failed miserably to complete. I ask you in good faith, outside all political considerations, to reinvestigate the assassination of this President Kennedy from the scene of the crime to the courtroom, which never happened, but which means the chain of custody on the rifle, the bullets, the fingerprints, the autopsy that defies belief, and that if it were a murder, we'd have given to the poorest man dying in a gutter. Let us reinvestigate the fingerprints of intelligence all over Lee Harvey Oswald from 1959 to 1960, his violent death in 1963. And most importantly, this CIA, whose muddy footprints are all over this case, a true interrogation. James Angleton, before he died, who was one of the original members of the CIA, was talking about Dulles and Helms and the others, what he called the Grand Masters. And he's a Catholic. Angleton was a Catholic in search, perhaps, of repentance before his death. He did say, quote, if you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. I guess I will see them soon. This is our democracy. This is our presidency. It belongs to us. Treat us with respect. Thank you.
Y'all's thoughts on JFK stuff.
I just had a few thoughts about the revelation from these papers. And I mean, so it was tens of thousands of papers. Or pages. So I couldn't read them. I didn't even know where to start. So I asked AI about the recent JFK release, and this is what it said. One paragraph. The JFK papers refer to the recently released documents related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which were made available on March 18th, 2025. These documents include over 2,000 unredacted records that provide new insights into CIA operations and other aspects surrounding the assassination, although they do not appear to contradict the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. That's the first thing. The second thing is I found elsewhere, the Wall Street Journal, their treatment of it was that the FBI and the CIA had in their records alerts, like warnings that Lee Harvey Oswald was a specific threat to JFK. And it totally, so it was a CYA thing why the Warren Commission covered it up. And that reminded me so much of the 9/11 kind of limited hangout whitewash thing where they said, oh, well, if only the different factions would have of the government had communicated with each other, we would have heard that chatter out of Yemen. And, just this CYA kind of excuse for why the real truth was not revealed. And then the last thing is if you just looked at my Twitter feed anyway, every single person in alt media just highlighted highlight after highlight of Israeli intelligence being unredacted, being involved or cooperating in some of this stuff. And to me, that leads to kind of like the Hungarian Revolution or the Thousand Flowers or whatever, where they got people Iraq, before the Iraq War, they got people to come out and identify themselves as being revolutionaries or anti-Saddam Hussein or whatever. And I'm thinking that this is the prelude to a next step. And I think we're all going to talk about that in this conversation of how it's getting people to identify themselves for when there's a crackdown on media, among other things, for kind of anti-Semitic stuff, which I think is really just going to be used for censoring war objections.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, this is, I haven't really seen anyone yet flesh this out except for you, Monica. Now, I've had an inkling of this idea, but now you're really, it is beginning to come together. So you're saying they're flushing out these analysts or commentators on X and Telegram and social media who are more and more brazenly criticizing Israel. I think in some regards correctly, in others they go to a extreme, right? And then that's going to be used as the sort of new boogeyman leverage to then push forward.
Yes,
more.
and like with Alex Jones, when Alex Jones went up and was being prosecuted or whatever it was, civil suits for the Sandy Hook, there were other people. I never hear anyone talk about it, but there were other podcasters and bloggers I knew, I had followed, who were named or otherwise harassed in the suits, and they kind of stopped talking about S-Hook. They withdrew. And what you don't realize, I think, is that they will come up with a list of everybody who's going to be investigated, kind of like the FBI was doxing anybody, or if you put up your totally harmless videos from January 6th, every single person got a visit from the FBI. They have the capacity to make lists that are thousands of entities long, people, podcasters. People are on that list. I might be on that list, and I'm cautious about falling for this trap. But I think they'll take that list, and those will be the people who are accused of anti-Semitism, and just being on that list, being notified you're on that list, will have a chilling effect. And that's just step one, in my opinion.
Good points. Yeah, I think that's good points. With the JFK thing, I'm not going to lie, I didn't take much notice of it because I kind of operate from the principle that if they are telling us about some big reveal or a conspiracy, then it's just bread and circuses for the masses. You're not going to get anything of substance. And it's part of a long line of these controlled reveals that don't actually reveal anything. I mean, there's many things that we could be discussing right now that are far more consequential, and I would say have far greater public interest, like, for example, Epstein, than JFK. And all of the things that came out are things that we've already all discussed thousands of times and have been speculated on. So I just think it's more distraction. I think we saw another one just this week with Javier Milei saying that Hitler did in fact escape to Argentina after World War II. Did you see that one? And, it actually worries me when I see stuff like this because I just think we've really become quite unhinged. Like, I liked it when conspiracy was in the fringe corner of the internet, and now that it's become this kind of mainstream way of controlling the psychology and the thinking of the masses, I think that's a really dangerous place. And it's probably going to be weaponized en masse at some point because nobody knows what to believe. Everyone thinks everything's a conspiracy. There's no kind of solid footing anymore. And yes, I think it's really good that people are questioning more, but I actually don't see people becoming more discerning and actually coming to good conclusions. I just see people kind of looking a bit, I don't want to say schizophrenic, but it's almost like they don't know what's real and what's not, where's up, where's down. And maybe that's the point of it all. Maybe that is why they're doing it.
And the same people who are going bananas over all the Israeli intelligence stuff are the people who, many of them, like Trump. And Trump is over there. The JFK stuff is of no consequence, really, to us now. But starting World War III, or whatever the next war is going to be called, which Trump is doing in cooperation with Israel and the Anglo-American Empire, who knows what, who's on the top of that triangle. But that if they was going to apply that knowledge to anything, it might be to be staunchly against this war now. And there's a lot of wheel spinning that has nothing to do with that.
And just what Mike said, it's like, going back to Jefferson Morley, who said it was the CIA and Pentagon. And it's kind of like, okay, we knew this since the late 1960s. I mean, I wasn't even born, but I'm sure there were people publishing already stuff that, like, this is old news. And so the only new thing that would need to happen would be, and he's speaking in an official capacity on the record at the hearing or committee, something would need to be done. It's like, we already know all of this. Are we going to have an investigation, get people arrested, And I don't think that's going to happen, like Mike said, unless, what Oliver Stone was calling for. Unless that happens, this is all just wasting. I mean, this is decades of the same stuff going on. And then maybe, maybe we move on to I think this is the big thing that, Monica, you're bringing up. And I just want to share, again, a few things. Here's a cartoon. Bob Moran, the great cartoonist in UK. I've had him on my podcast. He made a quick sketch where it says, he's got Trump in two frames. The first frame, it's Trump saying the UK needs to restore free speech. And in the second frame, it's a little girl, a young girl behind Trump. She says, "Pardon me, sir. I just feel sad about all the dead children in Pallet. Arrest her," says Trump. One of my commentators and subscribers on Telegram said someone should send Bob Moran the old Bill of Rights so he can study up. And my subscriber makes a good point. He's citing, free speech exemptions in the U.S., where it says, the court found that during a time of war, the government can restrict speech that might hinder the war effort, even if that speech would be protected in peacetime. And I think this is the shoe that needs to drop. And it hasn't even clicked fully for me. Like, we forget that we are actually in war. We've been, like Orwell, we've been at war since forever. And technically, with the Global War on Terror, Patriot Act, we're in a permanent state of emergency. So the Bill of Rights, Constitution is actually, I could entertain that they are suspended. And so everything that they are doing, we are at war. We're, always at war. And as Monica's pointing out, they're preparing for the next big war. And we've got these clips Information liberation does good work. You've got this rabbi now talking about it's not enough that what does he say? That one must be anti-Semitic. And I'm like, well, where does this stop then? Do we make a bill where, Christians have been persecuted for millennia? Do we make you have to be anti-Christian? Do we make another bill for another people group? Like when Slavs were persecuted, do we make an anti-Slav bill? Like where does this stop? So we'll just play this clip.
Anti-Semitism is not just an age-old prejudice. It is a contemporary crisis manifesting on campuses across the nation. It is not enough for individuals or institutions to merely claim they are not anti-Semitic. As my father once taught me, it is not enough for people, especially public figures, to be neutral or not be anti-Semitic. One must be anti-Semitic. We must demand the same of our universities and government institutions. This hearing, in my opinion, is an attempt to be just that, anti-Semitic.
I mean, I think this is just insane. And then this guy, I think he just got in, he's talking about 5-year prison sentences for distributing anti-Israel flyers in the U.S.
Holding people accountable without, violating their free speech.
Sure. And again, I would remind you that there's no First Amendment right to conduct. There's a First Amendment right to speech, and the things that we're targeting in the bill are not speech. Again, if someone wants to stand across the street from my house and wave a sign on the sidewalk, they have every right to do that, and this bill won't have anything to do with that. But when it veers into conduct, and so the way we're going to approach this is through a hate crime kicker. So if you graffiti a building, it is a crime now. But if your motivation is hate, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in prison. If you want to litter, it's a crime right now. But if you litter and if your motivation is a hate crime, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in jail. It is a crime right now to hang banners from an interstate. For obvious reasons, we don't want to distract drivers. But if you do that and you have a hate crime, a hate motivation, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in jail.
How optimistic are you of moving this bill along?
I guarantee the bill will pass. And I never do that.
So I'd argue two things. So what they're doing, one, is all this hate crime legislation is actually the implementation of what they've planned for a half century, thought crime, Orwell's thought crime. Number one, so universally, and it's not just going to be Israel. It's going to be, that's the gateway drug. And then it's going to expand where if you commit a thought crime, you will go to jail for 5 years or whatever. And the second point is what Monica will flesh out, which is preparing for war. And just got a few more quick. I thought this was insane, this comment.
Oh, the immigration from Gaza. I love it. And I think it's doable.
Sorry, but I listen to everything at double speed.
Yeah. Oh, the immigration from Gaza. I love it. And I think it's doable, by the way. I think, by the way, it's doable for two reasons. It's doable for two reasons. Number one, the simple reason is that Gaza is uninhabitable. It's got unexploded ordnance, and it's got buildings that are about to collapse. People can't live there. So that's the practical reason. But the other reason, even maybe more important, the only way that Israel really wins the war, the way that radical Islamists, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hamas, the way they calibrate winning and losing is when they lose their land, and they have to lose their land.
Ambassador David Friedman, thank you very much.
Just real quick, more examples. 2 Irish citizens are ordered to leave Germany over pro-Palestinian protests despite no convictions. Lawyers say the move undermines civil liberties for EU citizens. This is not related to Israel, but in general, it's part of the same theme. Former Costa Rican president, Nobel Prize winner Oscar Arias said the U.S. had revoked his visa to enter the U.S. just weeks after he criticized Trump on social media. He says, I received an email from the U.S. government informing me that they have suspended the visa I have in my passport. The communication was very terse. It does not give reasons. And just, last story here I thought was interesting. Israel's latest vision for Gaza has a name, concentration camp. This is from 972, a magazine. And it says, unable to immediately expel Gazans en masse, Israel seems intent on forcing them into a confined zone and letting starvation and desperation do the rest. So anyways, you guys' further thoughts.
Well, I have quite a few things. So if Mike, you want to say something before I launch into it,
not a lot to add besides this is really worrying. It's the same thing that we're seeing in Great Britain, of course, with the people who were tweeting out about migrants and the rape of children by immigrants going on many, many decades now. Hundreds of thousands of girls have been targeted. And of course, people who were tweeting about this and speaking out about this, they started to weaponize those assault crimes, like you alluded to, Hrvoje, and put people in prison. And there are literally people now serving jail sentences that are longer for making tweets than people who literally have physically harmed and abused human beings. That's where we are in the UK. The same thing seems to be where the US is heading, and it's been done under a MAGA banner. But people really need to take a step back, because if we accept this, then I think by the end of this presidency, we could be in a different world. It's really scary how fast it's all moving. And these things ain't going to go. Once they've instilled something like that, the next president will advance upon it, and the next one, and the next one. And before you know it, it becomes impossible. Like what we're doing here right now will be impossible. It'll be impossible to continue. So I don't like it. And I just feel like America's sleepwalking into the same algorithm ghetto, technocracy, fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, as the rest of the world. Only they're accepting it because it's coming under the banner of MAGA. And I'm not anti-Trump, I'm not anti-anything, but I'm seeing all the same things happening in America as is happening everywhere else. It's just coming under a different name and a different banner.
So on that point, this idea, I have a couple of points, but to start out with, what that clip that Hrvoje showed was that hate crime, which you're talking about, both talking about this idea of thought crime. And just as a lawyer, there are two elements of all crimes. I've always hated the idea of a hate crime, of enhanced punishment for what's in your heart instead of what's in your mind. So there's the actus reus, and there's the intention, mens rea. The intention applies to the act. Did you intend to commit that act? Not why did you intend to commit that act? So it's a violation of the fundamental legal principles. And I never hear anybody talking about that. It's very dangerous. You're really not supposed to have legal principles that are virtually impossible to prove. You would have to attribute that to somebody, make them defend their own thoughts, which is a big problem for creativity, for political thought, for political discourse. And that leads me to some of your clips also, Hrvoje, relates to the academia. It's been in the newspaper the past couple of days. They're going after Princeton. They're going after Harvard. It's not enough, the guy says, to be against anti-Semitism. You have to be like actively anti-Semitic, which is first of all, Princeton and Harvard should never ever capitulate to the government suggesting that that it withhold research funds. Those research funds they use are really just corporate subsidies. They give or sell that research to the companies at a great discount to them. The companies would do it themselves. Princeton and Harvard are two of the richest institutions in the world. And they collect tuition. There's no reason for them to capitulate. I think they're just going to do it so that they can censor academia. And it's not about, in my opinion, anti-Semitism, because the original anti-Semitism bill that did fail to pass, and they always will come around from a different method when that happens, included criticism of the state of Israel in that. So what they want, so this to me all leads to a very clear historical pattern of censorship before and at the beginning of a war, which is going to include media, politicians, obviously, academia. And so these guys want an excuse to be able to censor their academics, in my opinion. Then we have two other things that are in our newspapers. Probably not getting a lot of press for you, but law firms and anti-injunction action. So the Trump administration is going after all the big law firms for criticizing Trump policy. Some people say it's Trump being vindictive. But what's happening is he's putting these law firms under pressure. Two of them have already capitulated. Really big ones. Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps have agreed. Paul Weiss, 40 million. Skadden Arps, I think 100 million of free work, pro bono work. And both of them highlighted drafting anti-Semitism legislation. So not only are they going to get that done free by the biggest law firms, as each of these law firms capitulate or make other deals, they are conflicted out of being the ones to bring countersuits. And that's an old divorcee trick. Like, you go around to all the divorce lawyers in the neighborhood and make sure that your spouse, you're going to, surprise with this, doesn't have really good par representation. And then the other thing is Congress wants to pass an anti-injunction law, which is saying that these circuit courts, these federal courts that are in regions, are trying to stop Doge, I think is like a big part of it, and other policies of Trump. And so what the courts are saying is this is just on its face illegal and no one should be doing it. It shouldn't just affect the parties to the lawsuit here. They're general injunctions. This is unconstitutional. It can go up to the Supreme Court. But in the meanwhile, you guys have to stop doing this. There's congressional law trying to stop these regional courts from making those kind of injunctions. And to me, generally speaking, I don't like judicial overreach, but there is going to be a lot of pushback from like the employees that are getting pushed out of the federal government without like a normal process. There's going to be a lot of causes of action. They're going to have to take them one at a time. It's going to clog up the courts, and it's also may affect the ability to stop some of these censorship laws and all of that. So they're hitting the judiciary, they're hitting the academia, they're hitting media. They're getting this legislation drafted. They're going to co-opt the politicians, but they don't need their help because these law firms are going to do it free. And I just see that whole thing as just like World War I, just like the Civil War and World War II. You're not going to be allowed to criticize Israel, and that is going to be a representation. It's all any criticism of the wars over there I think is going to go under this umbrella.
Mike, or just further thoughts on then the move? So what you're talking about is the preparatory phase, and then the actual going to war. We keep hearing all these movements of aircraft carriers now moving in, B-52 bombers being stationed, close to the Middle East. Iran just replied that they're surrounded by 50 U.S. military bases or whatever, which the Iranian general referred to as glass houses. So they're easy pickings for Iran. And so I think they are gearing up for war. And that's related to something Mike was mentioning, Europe's preparations. And I think, again, there are multiple things at play here. The financial aspect. So economy is collapsing. They're preparing for war. Europe wants almost $1 trillion to rearm. There was an article where they talked about, hey, look, Europeans have 10 trillions in savings. How about we help ourselves to some of that? And so, Mike, your guys is just what this war is going to look like. I mean, I think they're really going to go for Iran, and we're going to see things we haven't seen, since 2001, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen so I can kind of have a bit of a backdrop to what I'm going to say. But yeah, I think right now we're seeing a lot of things, a lot of chess pieces move into play. And I watch the financial markets a lot, and seeing the gold price basically since the Ukrainian war, it's pretty much doubled, right? And that's a very short space of time. So it's up 40% in just 12 months. And it's almost going up $100 a week right now. So you can see on this chart that we're currently up at around 3,120. It only broke 3,000 a couple of weeks ago. So this is interesting for a lot of people. And there was the narrative around Fort Knox, and maybe there's going to be some kind of reset, all of which I think eventually happens. But one thing I would say as well is gold historically has always been very good at sniffing out a period of crisis. It usually moves in the build up to crisis. If you go back to 2020 going into COVID, the gold price was moving months before COVID was ever announced. When everything looked fine and normal, the gold price suddenly started spiking and it kept on going up. And then about 4 months later, COVID was announced. And that's one indicator that I always look at. I always think, why is it going up so fast? Is this really just about Trump's tariffs? I don't think it is. I don't think that would be enough to result in some of the movements. Very strange flows of gold. And the same thing happened again going into the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. Just before that happened, all of a sudden we saw some anomalous spikes in the price. So that was the first thing I wanted to kind of point to. And then, Hrvoje, you just mentioned that the European Union is talking about rearming and spending $1 trillion on defense. But what really caught my eye was how they're looking to fund this defense. And there was this article, I've got a couple here. EU Commission unveils plan to channel 10 trillion euros of citizen savings into strategic investments. So Europe is perpetually underfunded. And it's known that they're trying to basically take us towards this totalitarian digital slavery system with CBDCs. But what they're actually proposing here is raiding the bank accounts of people to somehow use that for defense spending and also on greening as well. So trying to get to net zero. And I'll just read you a few lines from this one. They're proposing a savings and investments union. And what they want to do is address the missed opportunities for European savers by channeling the savings into productive investments, unlocking the full potential of the bloc's capital market. And this second article kind of goes into it a little bit more. It says, too much money sleeping in banks. Eurozone wants to wake it up. Christine Lagarde said from 2031, we need 800 billion euros a year to meet the European targets of a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we also need 75 billion a year to meet the NATO spending target of 2% of GDP. So what they're proposing is that the 35 trillion in savings that Europeans have, and there's 10 trillion in bank accounts, could somehow be used for defense spending and the green agenda. So whilst they wrap it up in this language about trying to support you in increasing your wealth and investing your money wisely, what it's actually about is looting the citizens. Now, the only way I can see them being able to do this is capital controls. It's going to be trapping people's money in the system. And then we know CBDCs are going to be rolling out at the end of this year. So I think we're getting to a really dangerous point in this as well, where they're going to actually be trapping your savings in the financial system. And it's not just savings either, but I just wanted to read you this line from Bruno Le Maire, which is France's finance minister. He said, European savings amount to 35 trillion euros, and a third of it is sleeping in bank accounts. That's money sleeping and not working when Europeans' money is supposed to contribute to growth, research, and employment. Really? I would have imagined that the taxes you take from people's salary, you can spend that on growth, research, and employment. But what he's suggesting there is that you have some kind of obligation as somebody who's earning from their labor to give your money back to the state somehow, or to have it requisitioned to be used for growth, research, and employment. And whether it's from your bank account or not, it doesn't actually matter, because what they're also proposing is taking it from pension funds, and it's already actually happening. Dutch pensions to invest 100 billion euros in risky assets. And again, this is going to be to bolster the defense sector. Norway urged to scrap ban on 1.8 trillion wealth fund investing in weapons makers. So again, the Norwegian Wealth Fund is one of the biggest pension funds in the world. It's there for the citizens, but there's actually a ban on investing in the military-industrial complex. So the opposition now is urging the Congress, or whatever they call it over there, to scrap that so they can put that money into defense contractors. And the UK is doing it too. The UK is saying now that they want to put their money not just into defense, but also into venture capital, which is the riskiest form of investments possible. And the UK is saying that we're not investing in enough risky assets. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want my pension in risky assets. I want my pension in something that's secure. I'm going to be there when I get to retirement. So my big worry is, firstly, that yes, this looks to me to be a way to fund some kind of war. They want us to pay for a war that they're going to be committing to. And secondly, that actually this is going to be a great looting of whatever wealth is left in the system before a financial reset. So your bank accounts and your pensions are certainly on the line. I think they're licking their lips and rubbing the greasy palms together and saying, oh, well, if it's in the system, we're going to try and take it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Just my quick thought. I'm just I'm referring back to I've been mentioning recently, sci-fi dystopia. I've been watching this show Silo, where they built these silos, and there's a structure, hierarchy, just like there is in any government or society. And you've got the down deep, which is like the low. You got the people who are sent to the mines, the people who work in mechanical, which are like the blue collar workers. They get like the worst quality food, and the people who are like IT and judicial who are at the top, and they're like the oligarchy. And what you're just outlining, Mike, in terms of the EU, the European Soviet, the Fourth Reich, they're taking all of our wealth. It's a wealth transfer. It's theft. It's the Soviet Union, right? They're making everyone poor, taking all their stuff, expropriation, and then to build this system. But it's like they're hollowing out everything. So even if they do that, I don't see how it's sustainable, because they're going to build this sort of like silo-like structure where everyone's going to be poor. These elite, occult elite at the top are going to be at the top with their digital systems. But how long can this system last if they've hollowed everything out? I just don't. I don't see it. And there was a great quote from someone I found on X yesterday. Let me read it. It's relatively recent. Can I find it? Here it is. A political system can survive many things: wars, natural disasters, economic crises, corruption. The one thing it cannot survive is being exposed as a lie. So those are my 2 cents there.
I might have some kind of technical points on that propaganda that you were showing us, Mike. First of all, I don't know who it was who said the money is sleeping in your bank account. Do you guys not have fractional reserve banking like we do? Surely.
Yeah, in
Surely
Europe,
there's not a box with your cash in.
No. In Europe, we have exactly the same system. So, as you know, when you give your money to the bank, you've essentially loaned it to the bank. You are investing in the bank, and you have no property rights over that money. If that bank goes bust, you are an unsecured creditor of the bank. You can only retain get those deposits back using an insurance scheme. But in Europe, we've actually got bank bail-ins, as you do in the US. So. Yeah. The bank gets to bail itself in with your funds. So absolutely, it's people put their money in a bank, it's because they want it in a bank. It's because they don't want to invest it in defense stocks or McDonald's or whatever they want to channel it into. But my larger point is that depending on where you put it, that money does get deployed. It is not sitting in the bank. It is not sleeping. It's going into other people's mortgages. That frees up those people, the money that they are going to invest in there. I mean, it's just the money's moving around. It's getting invested where, it's getting invested in a manner that reflects the risk return profile and what you're getting compensated for putting that money up, and the risk that you are being exposed to is market-based, let's say. I mean, I think I wanted to ask you about this too before we go too far off the subject of manipulating the price of gold. I thought they used to do that. But if you're telling people, no, we want you to invest in defense spending one way or another, it's kind of like, it's just a way to subsidize those investments where you don't have to give a market return, kind of the way the Saudis taking petrodollars, if this is a true story, it's as I understand it, and kind of being required to buy U.S. treasuries. It boosts the demand for U.S. treasuries, artificially suppresses the interest rate to below what a real perceived risk return level would be. So that's all they're doing is they just want to boost it so they don't have to pay the real risk return profile, I think. Yeah, well, I think what they're going to have to do is they're going to create some kind of bond, and they'll call it a green bond or a liberty bond or something ridiculous like this. And then the banks will put their reserves into these bonds, and they'll deregulate so that the banks can invest in all kinds of dog crap, put that into their reserves. And that's how they'll extract your wealth. So you won't know it's happening, but it will be happening with your bank deposits. It will be happening with your pension funds. If you've got an ISA, I think they will force that money into something like these green bonds, so much a percentage. But for this to work, they're going to have to trap capital in Europe because capital will flee.
Right.
My first instinct as somebody who understands it is get my money out of here. I need to escape this. So, I think this is going to get pretty nasty really quickly because, and I think it's going to happen in America too. I think the capital controls are going to be ubiquitous. It'll happen across the West. So I would say for listeners, this is something to be definitely aware of. Have your finger on the pulse of all of this, because if you don't start preparing for it, it could just happen like overnight. If they declare a war, for example, they'll immediately put capital controls in.
I've read 3 times already, and I didn't really understand what the point was. Articles saying U.S. assets are suffering from Trump's tariff bluster. And today, by the way, is Liberation Day. It's tariff day. So you're right. It's probably going to be called a Liberty Bond. But it's saying that European assets are benefiting from the kooky stuff going on here. So that could be a way to kind of cut off some of the escape routes of the European stuff. And I would also like to know if your governments do insure bank accounts the way our governments do. So if you lose that money, you will get it back with printed money later. And also, I think historically they did suppress the price of gold. And I'm just wondering if what's happening now means they just can't do it because they really needed to move around and they've lost control of that or forfeited control of that. Those 2 questions. Do you have insurance? And
we have insurance, but it's funded to the tune of about 20 pence per person, which is about, for you guys in America, it's about 10 cents. So
we get like $200,000.
Yeah, if the system comes down, you ain't getting nothing. In 2008, I think just a couple of banks failing bankrupted the system, and the government had to loan the system money to refund depositors. So there's no way that system is going to work. It's just an illusion put there by the banksters to make you believe that you are somehow protected when you're not. And that's what all it's there for. And the second question about gold's price manipulation, they've manipulated the price of gold since 1933. They had it at a fixed rate whilst they debased the dollar. Then they had the London gold pool going into the 60s, which is where a cabal of different countries were all manipulating the price. And then now it was never been easier because of the paper markets where they could just put naked shots on things. They could spoof the markets. And there's been loads of people convicted for this, but it's always individual traders. But I think the problem you've got now, Monica, is firstly that many countries have been going back to gold and buying it, like record buying by the central banks. It's not the individual investors. Most people have no idea that gold's at an all-time high. They have no idea about gold or its role as money. So it's the central banks. And I think because of what China's done in terms of their massive amounts of accumulation, it really makes it very difficult to keep those prices down, because what you often see is that when the markets open in London or New York, you see the price start to collapse, and overnight in China, they start to go up. So you can actually see the manipulation on the charts. You can see the volume spike and then the price get crushed. But I think they're going to struggle with that at this point, which is maybe why they've had to change the narrative around gold too in the US. They're starting to talk about Fort Knox and other things. It's all to kind of mask over what's taking place. And I think this plays to our bigger narrative, which we've all been discussing. And we called it in our very first few episodes that we think this year is going to be a big push to war, and it's going to be with Iran. And I think all of these things that we're discussing are actually linked to that. And if it is a war with Iran, that could go into something else entirely. It could be a world war. It probably would be.
Boy, on your Substack, you had a video about the bombers at Diego Garcia Island, the 2 aircraft fleets, that aircraft carrier, I forget, groups near the Straits of Hormuz. I have these leaked texts from, I don't know if you guys know about this, and I'm sure you have stuff to say, Roy. I didn't mean to launch into this other thing about these texts. We can talk about it if you want, but that thing on your Substack's been on fire lately. It really put it pretty clearly what's happening over there.
It must have been in my notes section. I can't find it.
It wasn't your post. It sounded like an Israeli guy actually narrating like a graphic.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's that Propaganda and Co. X account. They have they do good work. And they were saying, based on Ken Klippenstein, I think, based on some of the documents, that it seems like they're preparing for war with Iran. I always cite some of my seminal interviews with my past guests, like the late Dr. Francis Boyle, who in 2020 I did. I mean, my goal with my podcast is to create interviews that stand the test of time, you know, that you can refer to years back because they give you just the long-term big picture. And Boyle said, you know, the end game is Russia, Iran, China. It seems like they're pivoting for the moment away from Ukraine towards Middle East and then Pacific. And yeah, just if you guys have further thoughts, I did want to bring up some of the end of how they're taking the mask off of democracy and then election related stuff. Let me share real quick my screen. I was going to my Substack here, just real quick. Share my screen. Where are we? Here we are. All right. I thought this was amusing. Valery Zaluzhny and Zoltan Koskovic, who's a Hungarian dude, he comments on someone's running for president because you got Zaluzhny now talking about his background in the armed forces and diplomacy. He says, does military experience help in diplomacy? So is this guy going to replace Zelensky? And then, you know, Christine Anderson, Marine Le Pen, like going to jail now, having to wear, can never run for. You're seeing this is the same thing with the Georgescus, the Le Pens. Just no more democracy. We're finished. It's like they're saying that's it, guys. It was fun simulation, but we're doing the Squid Game thing now. You know, and Trump talking about serving a third term as president could be related to what you guys are talking about. If we go into war, was it with like FDR or whatnot? Where they extended the presidency, but yeah, you know, maybe he becomes for a third term president. And a lot of this stuff reminds me, because we're talking about tariffs and what's going on with Canada and US. And I had to bring this up again. I think I was in my previous podcast, I brought this up. Lately I've had a man crush on Tim Robbins. I'm being silly, but I was binge watching Silo, this sci-fi show, which I'd never heard of before. It's been sitting on my computer for a while, and finally I got some time. And it's post-apocalypse type thing. Well, this is related to what you're bringing up. So he plays one of the bad guys, although that's kind of murky whether he's trying to do the right thing. And Robbins was a COVID dissident. You know, he questioned everything about COVID. He was giving interviews about that. And what shocked me was, well, first of all, in the show, they've done 2 seasons. They're going to do 2 more. They do a flashback to what started the nuclear war. And they talk about Iran and Dirty Bomb. And the senator that goes into this restaurant to meet some news reporter, he has to be scanned radiologically before entering the restaurant. And it's kind of evoking COVID, right? Where you had to scan your thermals entering, and now it's like going to switch from that biosecurity control to the nuclear control. So are we going to in the near future be living in a world where you got to do your radiological scan before going anywhere? And then he mentioned something about the radiological event and questions whether it actually happened or not. Like we question with the 2020 medical event whether it really happened or not, or it was a psyop. And now they're actually positing, you know, predictive programming that there's going to be this war with Iran, nuclear bunkers. But is it really going to be like a bomb hitting, or are they going to simulate it somehow? You know, and so Robbins posted just a few days ago. He's not active on X. Every few months he chimes in, but he talks about, has Mark Carney ever been elected to parliament or any other political office? Where has he lived for the last 10 years? Does he really care about Canada, or was he sent in to accomplish what Trudeau couldn't for the World Economic Forum? If so, how will it benefit Canada to surrender its sovereignty to unelected bureaucrats of the World Economic Forum? This is Tim Robbins. It's like, wow, he gets it. He follows that up and he says, you know, a lot of people are saying in his comments that World Economic Forum is a conspiracy theory. So Tim Robbins believes, you know, they run the planet. I mean, I'm extrapolating here, but he says, I learned that from his comments that the World Economic Forum is a conspiracy theory and doesn't exist. So it seems that those of us that are concerned with the future looking like the China of digital IDs and banks freezing your accounts for your political views or lack of compliance to government edicts have nothing to worry about. So he's basically saying There's a World Economic Forum that's running the show. They want to bring in global oligocracy. That's what Tim Robbins is saying. Like, he's on our frequency. And then he goes on to say, I'm also not sure that this recent standoff between the US and Canada isn't just some pro wrestling scenario with Trump playing the heel and Carney playing the babyface. In the end, nobody wins except the promoter. Canada and US are independent countries. They deserve absolute sovereignty and freedom from outside influence or global governance, including the non-existent World Economic Forum. So I guess, the theme here is how the mask is coming off of democracy, particularly in the EU. Trump wants a third term, and the whole tariff stuff is just Lucha Libre World Wrestling Federation. And the solution is going to be like, okay, we're going to come together and we're going to make a deal, and North American Union.
Yeah, I like what he said. And yeah, that book, I actually read the book series about maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Really?
So I think that's what this is based on. Yeah.
Is it good? Is it good?
It's great. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it's called the Dust series, and it's about, what you said about people living in silos. They said there was some catastrophic war above ground, but it's really great. And I could do the spoiler for all you guys.
No, don't do it. I want to buy the book. I'm planning to buy the books. They have like a new trilogy. I think one of them is called Wool, Dust,
Wool, and I can't remember the third one. Yeah, there's another.
I was going to buy the trilogy, but then they're making like a new exclusive edition, which
definitely buy it. It's not ideological as well. Nowadays, of course, when they make a book, it's full of all kinds of crazy ideology. But anyways, going back to what you were saying, I think he's got a point there with this Trump and Carney thing. I think if you look at the tariffs from a broader perspective, there is no sense in what Trump's doing with these tariffs. It's I've just got a chat just to share with you all. This one is, where are we? So this is the Atlanta Fed's GDP estimates for this year in the US, and they've revised it down multiple times now. It's down to minus 3.7%. So it's going to destroy the US this year. This is what the US is up against in terms of China, the trade deficit. There's no way that you're tariffing your way out of that. That trade deficit with inflation. China is monumental. And China would be quite happy for, like, okay, tariff us. We trade. You've got the biggest deficit in the world. And then the other one that I wanted to show you was this one, which is the predicted inflationary consequences of the tariffs. Right. And you can see right number one, the US is going to by far have it's going to have the most negative consequences on the US. Canada second, Mexico third, Belgium, Brazil, and Belgium, Netherlands and Belgium, and then. It's actually not predicted to have much consequence over here. So I guess the question then becomes, is what we're seeing some kind of pantomime, as your actor friend said? I don't know his name.
Tim Robbins. Come on, Shawshank Redemption, all that. Yeah.
I always hated him because he was such a
is that who he's from? Okay.
I just care about authentic.
So is this genuinely the US trying to structure itself, or is this all the smokescreen behind which you start to gear up the world for a war economy? Because a war economy looks a lot like what's happening now. People disconnect. You have to onshore lots of industry. You requisition commodities. You requisition the manufacturing, and you split up with your ideological enemies. That is what would have to happen if a war is about to take place. And all of the economic elements of a war are happening. Gold's going up. Nations have already distributed lots of gold to protect their currencies going into a crisis. So it does kind of feel a little bit 1930s to me. Yeah. And it looks like it too with the tariffs. And one final thing is tariffs usually lead to hot wars, historically speaking. They are the build up to a hot war.
So in 2016, in Trump's first term, I remember he talked about bringing manufacturing home, and he did some tariffs. And I said, I think all this stuff is usually just nonsense bluster, but if he's actually going to do it, what he's talking about is Mussolini-style autarky, which is is preparation for war. You have to bring the manufacturing home. You have to get people not dependent on stuff that requires intercontinental transportation. And so I think that I was just a possibility back then, but it certainly seems like a probability now, or the most likely scenario. Plus, with the tariffs, they may be masking. I mean, for sure, I don't think the impact of the actual tariffs is going to be as big as the impact that rumors of tariffs have already had on the stock market and that kind of thing. So for me, that it seems like it's a smokescreen, but also an excuse. And if you can blame Trump's bluster and lack of foresight and radical, abrupt action that has no diplomacy or politicking as being responsible for crashing the markets, then crashing the economy, you get to cordon it off into him as a scapegoat. And so much of what's happening now, they need that. They have that cult of personality. He is rogue from the Republican Party. So they're using him as like the cause, and Elon Musk, like these are the villains. And you can kind of preserve the institutions if you can blame these guys for all this bad stuff that obviously is like a very long-term big picture plan.
Well, yeah, Jacob Nordengaard calls him the Wreck-It Ralph, and I mean, but I you know, we came together in July of last year for this very reason, and something just crystallized this week even further, where there was the story where South Korea, who was it, Japan and China coming together because of the tariffs, Trump's tariffs, to further free trade. And which is regional integration, globalization, further intertwining, right? And it's like, wait a minute, let's step back. Trump, the anti-globalist, the nationalist, is actually causing, right, inadvertently, I don't believe it, coincidentally, the anti-globalist nationalist Trump is the biggest cause of North American union, supranational globalist North American integration, European integration, right? He's pushing, we're going to leave NATO. They're going to create their EU army, which they've since forever dreamed about since the founding. So he's pushing North American globalist integration. He's pushing further European integration. And now he's pushing Asian integration. I'm like, if people cannot see this psyop, my goodness. And I forgot my other, point. I have one more share screen here. This was an amusing comment. This Senator Tuberville says, we've built China, we've built Middle East, we've built Europe.
Coming in, yeah. That's all over the country. I mean, it's no different. But we have built China, the American taxpayers. We have built the Middle East. We have built Europe. So now it's time they help us build back our country after we've helped them so much, and that happens through tariffs. So, I mean, it's going to be a slow process. There's going to be some pain before gains, but we've got to do it.
So at first I kind of was aghast at his comment, but then it's actually, there's some truth to it, because when he says we build China, you know, Kissinger opening up China, and they basically, in the way they did, right? They brought in all the tech stuff they chose China as the technocracy, right? I don't know. I'm ranting here.
I take a little bit of umbrage with the Europe, given that I can, any day of the week, go visit a building that existed before America even existed as a country. So I don't think he did quite build Europe. But one thing that I think was really important that he said there was there's going to be some pain, which is something that Scott Bessent said. There's going to be a detox. So it seems to me like the consensus and acceptance at the higher echelons is this stock market and everything bubble is ready to burst, and we're going to burst it on our watch now. And that's what's happening. I don't think they're going to be reviving this one anytime soon, meaning that, yeah, the whole financial system could enter a period of real reckoning, and that would line up with War II, because the way you bring people out of that is war brings a lot of jobs, and an economy that's going into depression or a global depression. That's how they got people out of the Great Depression. It was to get people back to work through World War II. That was literally what was in the build-up to World War II. And the Great Depression, when that stock market burst in 1929, it was because they raised interest rates rapidly going into 1928. So they popped the bubble, they reduced the money supply, the Federal Reserve, and they allowed the depression to ensue. And it feels kind of like that's where we are now. And one final thing I wanted to share with you all and for listeners is all of the savings of Doge. I've got a chart here showing the deficit is actually tracking currently at the highest rate for any year over the last 5 years. So all of this talk about saving money, if we look at the actual chart, the deficit is on track to be higher than it's been in any other year going back to 2020. So it's not having the stated impacts.
So if you guys, did you hear about this leaked text thing about the Houthi rebels? This was a big thing in the news over here. And let's see, Mike Waltz, I forget his job. He's the United States National Security Advisor. Okay. So we had this thing. It was a big scandal that J.D. Vance, the VP, the SecDef, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, like 10 people who were plotting bombing the Houthi, bombing Yemen. And instead of talking about why we're bombing Yemen, everybody's talking about this text where they accidentally included the editor-in-chief of Atlantic magazine. So he was privy to all of this, and he ultimately printed the entire text thread. Still, nobody's talking about Yemen, but there's all sorts of little goodies in here about how great we are and our genuine reasons for doing this and blah, blah, blah. But it says something about this. Michael Waltz, who's the National Security Advisor, says, it says, whether we pull the plug or not today, European navies do not have the capability to defend against the type of sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles and drones the Houthis are now using. So whether it's now or several weeks from now, it'll have to be the United States that reopens these shipping lanes. Per the president's request, we are working with the Department of Defense and State Department to determine how to compile the cost associated and levy them on the Europeans. So they're getting ready to demand payment from the Europeans because they're saying that, and that was actually in the video that you put in your notes in your Substack, Hrvoje, is that it's the Europeans who rely exclusively on the Suez trade, the Straits of Hormuz, that they're going to really owe us big time for this. But so they're, and obviously they don't, that's not really what it's about. What's really about is having this interoperability, in my opinion. But they're talking about Europe. And I think what he was probably talking about was the Marshall Plan.
Well,
right?
I
The
mean,
Marshall Plan. Yeah.
I think it's all about the world state. That's what all of this comes down to, building the totalitarian, satanic world government. And when you mentioned Europe, again, Mike has a point, but I think it's how we look at what he means, where if he's referring to Europe as the European Union, you know, there, I forget who wrote
the Marshall Plan
Christopher,
is what he's probably thinking of.
No, well, I think even further, well, that, but also Christopher, was it Christopher Booker? He wrote a fantastic book on the EU, and how there's academic papers talk about how 50+% of financing for the European Union project came from CIA and State Department. So he's not, again, he's not wrong. Yeah, wrong there. So yeah. Any other thoughts about anything, y'all?
No, I wanted to add one thing from this text where Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense, says the messaging is going to be tough on this no matter what. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, which is why we would need to stay focused on 1, Biden failed, and 2, Iran funded. So it just goes to show, I mean, yes, they put this out for public consumption, but it just goes to show that messaging that they tell their Fox News, they tell everybody, just make sure you understand we're doing this because we wouldn't have to do it if Biden hadn't failed, and it's all Iran funded. But I think you made a point earlier, Hrvoje, about when you're reading the Tim Robbins stuff, would the war with Iran even really happen? And I think that Iran has been controlled opposition for a while. That's why they killed Soleimani, and that they kill the guys. They killed that helicopter crash. They kill the guys who are not controlled over there. But if you have a war between Israel and Iran, it includes everything in between. We've talked about that before. So it could be that that's what this is really all about. But yeah, I don't think it's about Iran. I think it's about territory, like the other clip you played said. It's about make them all lose their land. Not to mention that guy, everybody he talks about, from Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, or whatever, ISIS, they're all CIA operations or Mossad, all of them. So you know it's not about that.
Mike's on mute. It's all about the world.
Dang it, Mike.
Oh, sorry, guys. I muted myself. Yeah, Trump said on Monday, if Iran don't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. And then I read in the Daily Mail, not my usual read, but it was the Economic Times quoting the Daily Mail. And they said that the senior diplomatic source from the American government said, from Israel's perspective, with Trump in the White House, this represents the optimum moment to deal with Iran. There won't be a better chance. So it does feel like, yeah, that's where it's all pointing right now. And, do you think that there's a chance that Iran makes some kind of deal and this simmers down, or that the actual objective is the war with Iran? It's what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm on the fence where it's two scenarios. One, where they just keep this fear porn going. We're going to make a deal like with the Carney Trump thing. It's always the same. So with the pandemic, it's like, we're going to we're going to lock down. No, we're not. Yes, we are. So they can just keep that going, or they could actually go to war. We've seen it in the past that they're psychopaths and they could go to total war, which they could utilize for many reasons.
And they might not even know the answer yet. Like I think so. When I remember when Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Trump were all in the running at the end in 2016, I thought, well, it doesn't matter which one of them wins. They're all going to move the ball forward.
Right. I mean, that's a great point.
I was just going to say, good luck getting the Europeans to sign up to fight, because I don't think that's happening. they threaten it all the time.
They just want your money. That's what they're saying. We're doing the fighting. We're going to send them the bill. That's what this is saying.
And what Monica was saying, that some of these actors, I mean, these guys are all actors, so they actually might not even really know. Like, maybe it was the case when Bush came to power in 2000. I believe Bush said, we're not going to start any new wars. And then a year later he did. Maybe Bush as an individual actually didn't know. And it's like the controllers behind this, the secret team, they were planning it. And then, and Bush was like, oh, okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter who comes in, left or right. They're just like, okay, yes, sir. We got to do this. We got to bomb whoever. And I just had a few random stories. This was a meme someone created.
Oh my God.
Using this,
you have to describe it for our listeners.
Oh, right. It's like a European soldier, a man that's got makeup on, like he's trans, and he's holding the EU flag, taking a selfie with a nuclear bomb in the background. That kind of goes to Mike's comment. But again, they'll probably just bring in conscription, and like what they did with Ukraine. Maybe that was just the shape of things to come. And they'll just be throwing old Croats and Frenchmen and Spaniards and Germans into vans, and
I'd love to see them try that in the UK. It would just be societal collapse, because it's such a Hunger Games society with so many different cultures, and so many of them are Muslim. So they ain't going to be supporting the right side. They're going to be on the supposed wrong side, and it would just collapse society. So let's see how that plays out in reality.
And this was Musk talking about Mars will be part of America.
I mean, I might go to Mars, but that will be part of America. Yeah.
My response to that, was this idiocracy. Come on, like, there's no way we're going to get to Mars. We didn't even get to the moon. Like, this is all a psyop. Mars, it's like they're doing psyops on us. And this story broke. Number of billionaires worldwide tops 3,000 for the first time. And it says, with their total wealth reaching $16.1 trillion. And it's like,
well, if you want to know who runs the world, that's a defined group. And this joker supposedly runs 5 of the biggest companies in the world, and he's got time for all this crap. Do you know anybody who runs even a small company? It takes all your time.
Yeah, and it's like the rich just keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. It's this global...
That's the plan. Not because they want to be rich, but because they have to keep people without resources, or they're going to go Ron Paul and assert their rights to representative government, which clearly is in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and this also speaks to that it's a technocracy, and obviously
Yes.
the richest people, we don't even know their names, right? The most,
Right.
the wealthiest.
Oh yeah, I will say the billionaires. Yes, I definitely think those 3,000 people are the high staff position, not the actual controlling people.
Yeah, and I just thought this was also interesting. The rates of migrant channel crossings under Starmer has been higher than under any of his conservative predecessors, with more small boat arrivals this year than at any time since they began 7 years ago. So again, it's just the mask is off. No more democracy, flooding our countries with illegal.
Wow, look at that chart. Boris
crossings.
Johnson is doesn't even register on your chart there. Rishi Sunak, I think, wasn't a big part of his ouster. He was just shoehorned in there anyway. There's nothing democratic about him putting there. But I think there was a lot of scandal about the immigration thing under him. And there was a big issue for the voters, and it looks like Starmer's doubling down, weirdly. And this is after Brexit.
Oh,
Who's driving this?
Brexit had no real impact on it at all. The year after Brexit, we had record crossings. So it was just, again, it was fooling the people into feeling like their vote counts. But I think the damage is done in the UK. And I think we've got some messy times ahead. The UK, I would say, in Europe, that's probably the place I'd want to be the least right now, just because it's such a violent society right now. If you look at the rates of crime, comparatively speaking, it's off the charts.
And they're surcharging Americans to go in, I think.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even want to go. I just read from the Croatian papers, like for Croatians to go to UK now, I'm sure the same for Americans or even Mexicans. I can choose my passport. You have to now, it's like you need a visa for your, you need a passport for your passport for your passport. Like, and they talk about, I saw EU announcement, like, oh, the Schengen, we're making it easy to travel. Like, what the hell? It's like, you need a passport for your passport for your passport. It's like, now for me, typically I can go visa free. I just buy a ticket to go UK or Europe. And it's now to go UK for Croats or whoever, you have to pay £20 or whatever, and then fill out a social credit form and wait to be approved. And they can.
You need to be anti-Semitic to get it.
Yeah, you have to be anti-Semitic, anti-LGBT, anti-climate, whatever narrative. And I'm like, it's not even a joke. It's like, this is the thought crime we're talking about. Or they want to approve you, and I can never go to UK. It's like, I don't even want to go. I don't care. I don't want to go. Screw you guys. I'm happy. And Val Kilmer passed away, and my favorite Val Kilmer movie was The Saint. I need to go rewatch that. I honestly love that movie. What was your guys' favorite Val Kilmer film?
Heat.
I have no idea.
Heat's a good one.
Well, I'm not a film guy. I don't even have a DVD player or a TV, so yeah, I have no idea.
Gosh, what do you never just to kick back in a group set? Do you guys just read sitting next to each other, which is fine with me?
I've watched the only films I've ever watched with my wife in 10 years is Lord of the Rings, and she did watch Harry Potter in Polish once. That was it.
No, Tombstone was another, second best, and of course Top Gun. Heat was entertaining. So, and I was joking because you guys were talking about the economy. I saw this article. I've joked about this for years, but Mexicans spent nearly $2.5 billion on tacos last year. So it's not a joke. I might actually have to become a taquero. That's when you were talking about, I think, Monica, when you were talking about we won't be able to do this anymore, Mike, you were saying because of the hate crime, thought crime, I might just have to become a taquero. And that means I'll have to pay, I don't know, maybe or maybe not, if I can get away with it, not paying taxes to the Mexican government, and also you have to pay like the mafia tax to the cartels.
Maybe this is how it ends. Hrvoje becomes a taco salesman. I become Poland's first fish and chip shop. And Monica, what are you going to do over there? You could maybe.
I like to make sauerkraut.
Monopoly actually in your little community now, haven't you? You've got the monopoly in food stands.
Yeah, I'll just sell sauerkraut on my front steps.
Well, I think that's all I got for this month, y'all. Any other
great.
thoughts?
Great catching up with you guys. Really stimulating stuff. And I've been devouring both of your Substack columns. I love them. So before we get together, I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about. And I just fall right into that. I just fall into it and don't come back out for hours. And I try to decide whether that's like doing homework, like I should be proud of myself, or if I was just goofing off for 2 hours, but it's always super engaging.
Yeah, no, nothing else to add. Just the hopeful part of my life right now. We're planting for spring, so got a lot of stuff going on in the garden, lots of stuff in the ground, and that's really my antidote to all of this craziness. Is what can I do about it? I'm going to go plant some stuff. I'm going to go stack some wood, chop some wood. That's what I
really want to visit your farm.
You should.
Okay.
In fact, we're doing some DIY spare bedrooms getting made. So you and your husband and your son or anyone, open invitation.
I really want to do that. I'm going to take you up on it. I'm going to take you up on responding to me, inviting myself to your house.
But we'll maybe do it soon because I think Europe might change over the next 10 years. We don't know where we're going here.
Yep.
And Hrvoje, I think you're coming across this year. So let's meet up in Croatia.
Look at that. Mike posted. He posted.
Wow.
Our kitchen on Saturday evening, midway through processing 3 geese and 10 chickens. This is the way. There's some old folks in your home, but they got in the bucket. They got geese and chickens in the bucket, and they're skinning them. That's the way, right, Mike?
Yeah, that was our recent Saturday evening. So that's what we do instead of TV, Monica. We've got. We processed a lot of chickens. We all sit there together plucking, and then my father-in-law butchers them, and then we all sit down and have a nice meal together. And that's a lot of work actually running a small holding, but it's so rewarding. And that goose, which we raised ourselves, was extremely tasty.
Did he or she have a name?
Yeah. You named the
Actually,
food.
they did. Actually, they did. We raised them from being literally we hatched them. So that's why my father-in-law has to come over so he can actually do the deed because.
You can't. What was its name? What was the super tasty one's name?
I think that was Truskawka, which is Polish for strawberry.
Aww.
Because you really like to sit in the strawberry patch.
But hey,
listen, guys, this is what you got to do if you want to live on a
homestead. What better use
homestead.
for life than to serve the one you love?
You get
Either way, he's serving you, and you're actually serving him. Sorry, too soon.
I've already surveying my kitchen, so yeah, you've got hot water.
Your Berkey water filter. I got the same one.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. We're actually currently just doing all of our house sites like a bomb site here. No, I shouldn't say that. Having said everything we've said tonight, that's probably not the words to choose.
Trust me, I've seen it.
Oh, sorry, Monica, I can't complain. So anyways, guys, fantastic episode. Thank you for joining me for this one. I'll hand it over to you two to say goodbye, but you know where to find me, parallelmike.com or my YouTube or Substack. Substack's probably the best place. Please subscribe. Join up as a paid member. I'd appreciate it.
And I'm Monica Perez on Monica Perez Show, anywhere you're looking for it.
And I'm Hrvoje of Geopolitics and Empire podcast. And don't forget, every month, more or less, we hold a live Q&A on Zoom for supporters, for our supporters, where we shoot the breeze like this for an hour or two. It's recorded later and posted only for supporters. And you can get access to, if you subscribe, become a paid subscriber to any of our respective platforms, Parallel Mike, his Substack or his membership option, or Monica's Substack or Geopolitics Empire Substack. And so that's all for this roundtable. Be seeing you, as Patrick McGoohan would say.